A young black boy was stopped at an airport, accused of carrying illegal items in his suitcase. Security ignored the canine dog's warning and targeted him instead, until one backup video revealed everything. What seemed like routine profiling unraveled into a deeper conspiracy to replace trusted K9S with flawed AI. This is a story about prejudice, courage, and a dog that refused to stay silent. If stories like this matter to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what really happened next. The air inside JFK International Airport felt too cold for June. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting sterile glows across polished linoleum floors and endless rows of retractable belts guiding passengers through customs. Amid the murmur of conversations, rolling wheels, and routine commands, a young boy stood very still near a secondary screening checkpoint, his hands clenched around the handle of a standard black suitcase. His name was Jalen Monroe. He was 13, wearing sneakers too clean for travel, a green NASA hoodie slightly oversized, and a look in his eyes that oscillated between wide-eyed awe and something harder to define, like a question no one had given him permission to ask. Jalen had landed 37 minutes earlier on a direct flight from Atlanta. It was his first time flying alone. His parents had stood at gate A9 and waved until the plane took off, his mother triple-checking his documents, his father reminding him not to talk to strangers unless they had a badge and a reason. That final reminder now looped in his head as two TSA officers, one with a mustache too thick to be stylish, the other younger, distracted and yawning, leaned over a monitor and pointed at his bag. The younger one, Officer Baird, pressed a button and watched as Jalen's suitcase was rerouted from the general belt into the secondary inspection lane. Bags flagged, he muttered. The older one, Officer Harmon, cracked his knuckles. Gimme quelle signature. Something lit up. He glanced toward Jalen. Chi di traveling solo. What's he, 12? 13. Baird corrected after glancing at the passport. No guardians on record. Traveling to some science camp. Harmon raised a brow. Science camp. The skepticism in his voice wasn't subtle. Jalen stood quietly as they called him over. He stepped forward, chin lifted the way his mother taught him. Stand like you belong, even if the room makes you feel otherwise. His voice was polite. Is there a problem, sir? Maybe not, Harmon replied, motioning to the bench inside the inspection zone. Sit down. Just a quick check. Jalen obeyed, slipping his backpack off his shoulder and settling into the metal bench. He could hear other travelers moving around him, rushed footsteps, rolling suitcases, laughter in languages he didn't understand. But this space? It was silent in a way that made his heart beat faster. He remembered what his science teacher, Mr. Jaffe, once said about stress, that your body can't tell the difference between a lion and a security checkpoint. It reacts the same, faster breath, tight shoulders, a stomach that flips for no reason. Even if you've done nothing wrong, Jaffe had said, your body doesn't care. It just knows it feels watched. Officer Baird unzipped Jalen's suitcase slowly, deliberately, like he was expecting something to hiss or explode. Inside, 4 neatly folded t-shirts, 3 pairs of jeans, 1 pair of pajama bottoms, a science kit from the airport gift shop, a book on robotics, a reusable water bottle, and a stack of sign camp forms in a yellow folder. The officer rifled through it with a latex-gloved hand, then turned to Harmon. Nothing here, he said. No visible threat. But it flagged, Harmon insisted. He walked back to the monitor and scrolled through the scan image again. There. See that? That outline could be a battery pack. Could be a custom configuration. Could be something else. Jalen listened, but didn't understand most of what they said. What he did notice was the way they stopped talking when he looked at them, how their voices lowered when they stepped away. A third person arrived, a woman in uniform, her ID clipped to a vest labeled supervisor. Her name tag read T. Caldwell. She scanned the screen, looked at the suitcase, then back at Jalen. Do you mind stepping with me for a moment? She asked. Just a few questions. He followed her through a door into a side interview room. It was empty except for a table, 2 chairs, and a poster about prohibited items. She offered him a seat, then turned on a small audio recorder on the table. State your name for the record, please. Jalen swallowed hard. Jalen Monroe. She nodded, writing it down. You're 13? Yes, ma'am. And you're traveling alone? Yes. I have my papers. I'm going to the Caltech Young Innovators Program. I have a scholarship. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the official envelope, carefully unfolding the acceptance letter. Caldwell skimmed it, but her expression didn't change. Have you handled this bag the entire trip? Yes, since I packed it at home. My mom helped me zip it. Did anyone else touch it? Not that I saw. You didn't leave it unattended? No, ma'am. The questions continued, routine on the surface, but they left Jalen feeling smaller with each one, as if each answer he gave made them more convinced he was hiding something. The supervisor tapped her pen against the table. Can you tell me why your bag might test positive for nitrates? Jalen blinked. I don't know what that is. She exhaled and stood. All right, stay here, please. When she left the room, Jalen's knees bounced under the table. He had done everything right. Every instruction followed, every paper printed. He wasn't supposed to be here, sitting under buzzing lights, heart hammering like he'd been caught, doing something wrong when all he did was fly to camp. Outside, he could see her talking to the officers again, pointing at the suitcase, gesturing toward him. The words came in fragments through the glass. Too confident, traveling solo, maybe trained. Jalen clenched his fists. The hum of the overhead lights in the interview room began to feel like a clock ticking backward. Jalen sat alone, his hands folded on the table, trying to remember the exact moment he picked up his suitcase. His mother's voice kept repeating in his head, "Be precise. People will always assume if you hesitate." But what did precision mean here, when the rules seemed to change as soon as he walked off that plane? Outside the room, Officer Harmon stood with his arms crossed, watching the security monitors with a scowl. "Where's the carousel footage?" he asked, nodding toward the screen that showed a frozen frame with the message playback error. Feed not available. Officer Baird tapped a few keys, then shrugged. It glitched. The terminal cam went down around 8:37. Maintenance said the loop system's been flaky all week. Convenient, Harmon muttered, chewing the inside of his cheek. The moment the kid picks up a flag bag, the camera just happens to stop working. Baird didn't reply. He was young enough to still be unsure when to speak and when to shut up. Harmon didn't have that problem. He leaned forward and pointed at a still frame just before the crash, grainy, out of focus, but visible enough to show another figure stepping away from the carousel. A tall white man in a gray suit, wheeling a black suitcase nearly identical to Jalen's. "Who's that?" Harmon asked. "No tag match," Baird said. "He didn't check that bag. Might have been carry-on. Or maybe he switched bags," Harmon said darkly. "The kid grabs the wrong one. Boom. Flagged. Just like that. So, it could have been an accident," Baird suggested cautiously. Harmon snorted. "Or a setup." He didn't elaborate. Meanwhile, Jalen was still inside the room, staring at the metal grate under the table, listening for footsteps that told him what would happen next. The door creaked open, and another officer stepped inside. His uniform was similar, but the attitude was different. This one walked like he'd been doing this longer than anyone else. His nameplate read Lieutenant Alton Shaw. His reputation preceded him, strict, unsparing, with a zero-tolerance record and a fondness for what he called pattern recognition. He glanced at Jalen, at the open folder on the table, and then at the suitcase still sitting half unzipped by the wall. He didn't sit down. "Tell me again," he said. "From the moment you stepped off the plane." Jalen straightened. "I walked to baggage claim. Waited for my bag. When it came, I picked it up. Did you see anyone else touch it?" "No, sir." "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir." Shaw nodded slowly, then looked down at the open file. "You from Atlanta?" "Yes." "What school?" "I go to Mapleview Middle." "Good grades?" "Yes, sir." "Any history of behavioral issues?" Jalen hesitated, confused. "No." "Ever been in trouble?" "No." "Ever been searched before?" "No." "Then maybe you can explain to me," Shaw said, his tone sharpening, "why your suitcase tested positive for explosive residue." Jalen blinked. "I don't know. I didn't put anything in there." "No one's accusing you," Shaw said, although his eyes said otherwise. "But this doesn't happen by accident." Outside the room, Baird leaned toward Harmon again. You think he did it? Harmon shrugged. He's got the profile. Young. Traveling alone. No adult oversight. Looks nervous. He's 13, Baird pointed out. Exactly. Old enough to be used by someone. Smugglers, runners. They pick kids who won't ask questions. And no one suspects them until they mess up. Harmon checked his watch, then added, besides, he fits. Fits what? The cases we've seen before. The look. The attitude. The same. You know. Baird didn't reply, but the way Harmon trailed off said more than the words themselves. The look had nothing to do with travel habits and everything to do with skin tone. It wasn't stated aloud, but it was there in the way Jalen was being handled, in the way assumptions replaced facts. Back inside, Jalen could feel it too. The shift. Questions were no longer about the bag. They were about him, about who he was or who they thought he might be. Sir, he tried, voice steady. I packed this bag with my mom. She even made me double-check my toothbrush. I don't even know what explosive stuff smells like. Shaw said nothing, only studied him for a long moment. We're running your name through every domestic watch list, he said. Until then, stay here. Don't touch anything. He stepped out, closing the door behind him. Jalen sat frozen. His palms were sweating, his breath shallow, but he refused to cry. Crying would only make it worse. Outside, Shaw joined Harmon and Baird at the monitors. Kids playing it cool, Harmon said. That's the problem with the quiet ones. They think if they act polite, you'll let your guard down. Shaw didn't respond. He stared at the screen, at the frozen image of the man in the gray suit, the one who had vanished from the carousel frame seconds before Jalen had appeared. You said the footage is gone? Just that segment. The backup server failed. Give me the maintenance logs. And have IT cross-reference bag check-in times. If someone planted that case, they didn't do it alone. You think it was intentional? Baird asked. Shaw narrowed his eyes. I think the kid's a question mark. But someone in this airport made a calculated move. And someone else made it easy. Back in a room, Jalen stared at the mirror on the wall, wondering if someone was behind it. Watching, judging, waiting for him to blink wrong. He remembered his father's advice about the second skin, the idea that as a young black boy, he'd have to learn to wear another self in public. Calm, courteous, predictable. Anything else could get misread, misused, turned into a threat. He had followed every rule. And still, he was here. Still, they looked at him like he might explode. He clenched his fists tighter and breathed slowly through his nose. Somewhere outside this room, his suitcase sat half open, still smelling faintly of detergent and airport. Somewhere on the carousel, a man in a gray suit had walked away free, unnoticed. Somewhere in the system, a camera had glitched at just the right moment. And outside the door, someone was preparing to decide what would happen next, based on a gut feeling, not evidence based on a look, not truth based on what they thought they already knew. And in that narrowing space between doubt and danger, something else was beginning to shift. Not outside, but inside Jalen himself. The hallway outside the interview room felt heavier now, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of assumptions no one dared name. Officer Shaw stood at the far end, arms folded, his gaze fixed on the silent surveillance feed, still blinking with an error message. Across from him, Harmon tapped his fingers against a clipboard, his irritation barely concealed. The search through baggage records had hit a wall. Maintenance hadn't responded, and the man in the gray suit remained a shadow with no name. This isn't going anywhere, Harmon muttered. We've got a flag bag, a kid who fits a dozen profiles, and no clear footage. Either we escalate this, or we let him go and risk looking foolish if we were right. Shaw didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved toward the K-9 wing across the security checkpoint where a handler was walking toward them, tall, calm, with a leash in one hand and a German shepherd in tight formation at his left side. You called in K-9? Harmon asked, surprised. That's not standard for minors. Neither are positive explosive hits, Shaw replied. I want confirmation. The handler stopped near the carousel area, clipped a communication device to his belt, and signaled for clearance. The dog, broad-chested, low-slung, eyes sharp, moved with the kind of quiet discipline that made passengers instinctively step back. His name, Stitched in faded black on his harness was Hero. His coat was dark, streaked with silver on the muzzle, and there was a scar under his right ear, barely visible beneath the fur. "That's Hero," Harmon asked. "Didn't he get pulled off duty?" Shaw nodded. "He's back on limited rotation. Handler's new, but the dog's the same. They say he still reacts sharp if the target's real." Harmon didn't say more, but there was something in his face that tightened when the dog passed him. Hero sniffed the air once, paused briefly, then walked toward the inspection zone. Jalen, still seated in the interview room, had been watching through the narrow window slit when the dog appeared. At first, he thought it was just another part of the airport, security doing security things. But then he saw how the dog moved, slow and careful, and how the officer behind him seemed to be following, not leading. The handler gave Hero a short command, and Hero immediately walked toward the line of separated bags on the inspection table. He passed by Jalen's suitcase without hesitation. No change in gait, no nose drop, no sound, just a quiet step forward. The handler gave a short click. Hero circled once, then turned sharply, his body stiffening. His ears perked, his eyes locked on a different suitcase, similar in size and shape to Jalen's, but tagged as unclaimed. It sat quietly by the wall, untouched since it had come off the carousel and been moved by a junior staffer. Hero froze, then let out a deep, guttural bark, one, then two, then a string of short, loud signals that echoed sharply off the tile floors. The bark made every nearby officer flinch. The handler tightened his grip. "Strong alert," he said into his calm, marked bag. "East wall. Black Samsonite, no tag." Shaw and Harmon moved quickly to the site, eyes wide. "That's not the kid's bag," Harmon said. "No," Shaw replied, already crouching to inspect the exterior. "That's not anyone's bag on our list." And Hero skipped the flagged one entirely. So the first bag was a false positive? Or the data was wrong? Shaw muttered. He stood, motioning to two uniformed officers. "Evac the immediate area. We need bomb squad eyes on this now." The handler pulled Hero back gently, giving the dog a short praise cue. But Hero didn't stop staring at the bag. His body remained tense, his eyes locked, as if waiting for something to shift. Back in the interview room, Jalen sat frozen, watching the commotion from his narrow window. He could hear the barking, muffled but sharp, and saw officers moving with purpose. One of them gestured toward a different wall. Another pulled on a vest. No one was looking at his suitcase anymore. No one was talking about his bag. And yet, he was still locked inside, still waiting for someone to tell him what they were learning outside. In the command room, Harmon stood over the bag Hero had identified, now encased in a portable containment shield. "You're telling me this sat here untouched for over 45 minutes? It came in around the same time as the kid's flight," the junior tech said. "No tag, no pickup, and no one thought to flag it. It wasn't scanned. It was rerouted to overflow by accident." Shaw looked over the manifest. "And the surveillance still isn't back?" "Still glitching," the text said. "We're trying to restore cache segments, but the carousel timestamp range is corrupted. We need chain of custody on every bag on that belt," Shaw ordered. "And someone find me a roster of contractors working perimeter security this morning." Down in the hallway, Hero was still pacing in short arcs near the tag bag, his body low, tail rigid, nostrils twitching. The handler tried to draw him away, but Hero hesitated before obeying. It wasn't a false alarm. That was clear. The intensity of the reaction wasn't just detection, it was conviction. Shaw watched the dog closely, the scar beneath Hero's ear suddenly reminding him of the incident 2 years ago, the warehouse bust, the teenager who died, the explosives that didn't trigger the sensors until it was too late. Hero had been the only one to alert that day. His warning had been overruled, and the system had written it off as a malfunction. That was the last time Hero had been deployed until now. Inside the room, Jalen felt something shift, not in the walls, but in the energy around him. The footsteps no longer came toward his door. The tension wasn't centered on him anymore. He didn't know what the dog had found, but he knew something important had just changed. And still, no one came in. No one told him anything. But through the narrow slit of the glass, he saw the way people were moving now, not with suspicion, but urgency. Not toward him, but away. He exhaled slowly and turned his gaze back to the floor, unaware that just 2 doors down, Hero was standing in front of the bomb squad's equipment case, his ears still alert, his body not yet at ease, waiting for someone to finally pay attention to what he had seen. The sharp staccato barks of Hero still echoed faintly through the security wing as Lieutenant Shaw stepped back from the containment unit, arms crossed, jaw tight. Around him, agents moved with tense efficiency, cordoning off the area, marking zones, reporting via radios. But Shaw didn't look satisfied. He turned toward the handler, eyes narrowed. That dog gave an alert on a bag we haven't verified. But the bag we flagged initially still hasn't been cleared. Run him again. The handler raised an eyebrow. Sir, Hero didn't respond at all to that suitcase. He passed it without hesitation twice. I didn't ask for opinion, Shaw snapped. I asked for confirmation. Run. Him. Again. The handler gave a clipped nod and gestured for Hero to reset. The dog circled back, reluctant, glancing once more toward the bag he had previously alerted to. The leash tugged slightly. His posture shifted, but as commanded, Hero approached Jalen's suitcase again. Sniffed. Paused. Saturday. Noilet. Nothing. Just like before. Still nothing, the handler said. The dog's consistent. We'll be the judge of that, Shaw muttered, already turning away. He gestured at Harmon, who stood near the terminal monitors, still showing the frozen glitch screen. Resume physical inspection of the kid's bag. Disassemble it completely. False negatives happen. Protocol is protocol. At that moment, the energy shifted once more, not for the room, but for Officer Lynn Alvarez, standing at the edge of the corridor, tablet in hand. She was new enough to still remember why she joined TSA. Something about fairness, safety, the promise that truth would rise if you stayed calm and watched closely. Lynn had been watching Hero since he entered, watching not just his reaction, but the subtle tension in Jalen's posture when the dog passed by his door. Jalen had leaned forward, just slightly, eyes searching through the window's slit, face stiff with fear, but also recognition. He knew the barking wasn't about him. No one else had caught it. No one else was looking. Lynn tapped her screen once, then discreetly angled her tablet toward the hallway camera feed, using an internal access channel she'd learned from a tech briefing 2 weeks ago. Most officers didn't bother with diagnostics. Lynn did. She refreshed the corrupted footage list, narrowed the timestamp, and waited for a fragment of pre-buffered data to load. Something flickered, low resolution, frame drop heavy, but legible enough. A man in a gray suit wheeling a black suitcase identical to Jalen's. She hit record, cached it silently. No one saw. Meanwhile, in the inspection room, Jalen's suitcase lay open, gutted. Shirts unfolded. Toothpaste uncapped. Plastic baggies torn open, sniffed, swabbed, and tossed aside. A small screwdriver disassembled the handle. Baird hovered nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable as Harmon dug deeper into a bag that clearly held nothing more than a teenager's essentials. This is a waste of time, Baird said under his breath. We should be checking that other suitcase, the one the dog barked at, Harmon interrupted, is already being dealt with. But our job is to verify the original flag. You don't move on from a lead just because a dog got distracted. Hero's not known for false alerts. And yet here we are, Harmon replied flatly, pulling out Jalen's robotics guide and flipping through the pages as if expecting explosives to fall out. Inside the holding room, Jalen sat motionless, watching his belongings splayed across the table through the glass. No one had spoken to him since the barking stopped. No one explained what the dog had done or what it meant. They just kept opening his things, prying into his life, without explanation or apology. His hands trembled slightly in his lap, not from guilt but from the slow erosion of dignity. His toothbrush lay on the table under harsh light. A pair of socks had fallen to the floor, stepped on by someone's boot. His notebook, pages creased now, flipped open to a doodle he'd drawn on the plane. An orbit diagram. Mars and Europa, labeled in pencil. A small rocket scrawled in the corner with his name under it. The same page now bent and oily from gloved hands. Lynn took a silent photo of the inspection from her corner, wide frame, time-stamped. She didn't know yet why she was documenting, only that something about the process felt off. She toggled back to her recording of the surveillance blip, replayed it. The man in the gray suit set down his suitcase briefly near the conveyor edge, glanced around, then walked away without picking anything up. 30 seconds later, Jalen entered the frame. His own suitcase came off the belt right next to the gray one. He reached down, grabbed the one on the right, his right, and walked out. It was all there, just long enough to see. Lynn closed the file and encrypted it into her folder. No internal system flag. No share. Not yet. She needed time to think. Harmon slammed Jalen's bag shut, zippers frayed from too much force. Nothing. Again. That's the third full check, Baird said. No explosive trace. No organic residuo. No device signature. Run it once more. Disassemble the lining. Sir, we're tearing up a clean kid's suitcase while ignoring. We're following the flag, Harmon snapped. This is security, not social work. If we miss something, it's our badge, not his. Lynn approached quietly, holding up her tablet. Sir, she said, addressing Shaw this time. The bag the K-9 alerted on, the one near the east wall. Has anyone claimed it? Shaw frowned. Still unclaimed. Why? Because it matches the exact model as Jalen's. And I found fragment footage showing a different man handling a similar bag just before the cameras failed. Surveillance is down. Yes, sir, but the buffer cache stored a low-res clip. Enough to see movement, timing, and proximity. That's not admissible. Maybe not in court, Lynn replied carefully, but it's enough to warrant checking the other lead fully. Shaw exhaled through his nose. And the dog? The dog ignored Jalen's bag twice. Gave a Class 1 alert on the untagged one. Dogs can be wrong. So can people, sir. Shaw didn't reply. He looked past Lynn to Jalen, still seated alone, watching through the window like a prisoner waiting for a verdict. Shaw's face remained impassive, unreadable. Then he turned back to Harmon. Pause the inspection. What? Bag's been stripped clean 3 times. Move resources to cross-check the unknown bag again. I want bomb squad confirmation within the hour. Harmon looked irritated but didn't argue. Lynn stepped back, heart thudding. She hadn't fixed anything. But maybe, just maybe, she'd slowed the harm. She glanced at Jalen again, who now turned his eyes toward her and held the look. Not trust, not hope, just a quiet, exhausted awareness that someone, finally, had noticed. And outside, Hero stood still beside his handler, his body facing that same suspicious bag, as if he knew this was far from over. Officer Lynn Alvarez didn't return to her post immediately. Instead, she ducked into the narrow operations bay behind the security desk, a cramped, low-ceilinged room that smelled faintly of burnt circuits and overused air conditioning. Inside were 3 auxiliary monitors patched to secondary surveillance feeds that weren't part of the official rotation. They existed for overflow scanning, backdoor observation, and camera zones most staff ignored unless a tech team flagged them. Lynn hadn't touched these systems since training week, but something in her gut insisted she follow it through. Her fingers moved across the control panel as she keyed into the off-network node, reloaded the backup footage, and filtered by timestamp and sector. Gate 4B to Carousel Zone, 8:24 a.m. to 8:40. The system lagged for a few seconds, then a dull window opened. Low resolution, no audio, occasional static, but movement was visible. She tapped forward frame by frame. At 8:28, the man in the gray suit reappeared. Same sharp lapel, same silver rolling suitcase. He stood near the carousel as bags began to emerge. He glanced left, then right. No one paid attention. The area was busy but fluid, with staff cycling between baggage transfer and belt maintenance. The man bent down, briefly unzipping the side pouch of his own case, and with his other hand reached over to another black suitcase, Jalen's. With barely emotion, he peeled off Jalen's bag tag and pocketed it. Then, calm and unhurried, he placed a new tag on Jalen's suitcase, one that looked airport-issued but bore different codes. In a practice movement, he swapped his own bag with Jalen's position on the carousel, wheeled his away, and disappeared into the crowd. Lynn froze the frame. She enhanced it slightly, not to get a clear view of his face, but to confirm emotion of the tag's switch. It was precise, premeditated, not a grab-and-go confusion. She cross-checked the moment against Jalen's arrival, 8:31. Just 3 minutes later, Jalen picked up the tampered bag, unaware it wasn't as he packed it. Lynn hit export. Saved the clip to her encrypted folder. Her hands trembled slightly, but her focus sharpened. This wasn't about a misread signal anymore. It was intentional, and someone had used a child as a carrier. Outside the bay, the tension in the terminal remained taut. Bomb squad officers had taken control of the secondary bag Hero had alerted on, but the markings on the tag had created a procedural mess. The suitcase had been labeled TSA Quarantine, Transfer Hold, with a destination code for a connecting flight to Toronto, scheduled to depart within 2 hours. That label meant it had been slotted for bypass screening, assuming it had already been checked at its origin. But a closer look showed a critical discrepancy. There was no originating scan record. The bag appeared in the system only at JFK. No entry, no source, just presence. Harmon, now visibly frustrated, argued with the operations lead. Transit bags don't just appear out of thin air, he said. If it's marked as holdover, we should have a chain log. The supervisor rubbed his temples. We don't. It skipped manifest. The barcode doesn't match any manifest from incoming flights. Then it shouldn't have gotten past initial screening. And yet it did. Shaw approached with slow steps, his eyes fixed on the suitcase now sealed within the containment perimeter. You think it's a ghost bag? He asked. The supervisor hesitated. It shouldn't exist, sir. No trail. No registration. It looks like someone spoofed a barcode to push it through as an unexamined transfer. And the dog found it immediately, Shaw said. He glanced toward Hero, now lying down beside his handler, but still focused on the sealed case. Then we've been looking in the wrong direction all morning. Protocols say the flag bag takes precedence, Harmon insisted. The kid's bag tested positive, but the dog's nose didn't. The dog doesn't write reports, Harmon replied. We do. Lynn stepped into the hallway, voice quiet but firm. Then maybe it's time we write a new one. She handed Shaw the tablet. The video played silently. The gray-suited man moved like someone who'd done this before, calm, methodical, and with purpose. The tag switch. The suitcase shift. The quiet exit. Shaw watched the footage all the way through without speaking. He rewound it, played it again. Finally, he looked at Lynn. How did you find this? Secondary buffer feed. The main carousel cam glitched, but the service cam kept low-res records. Why didn't anyone else check those? Because they weren't trained to. Shaw gave a short nod. Send that to my terminal. Encrypted. And log a report through Ops internal only. Understood. Down the corridor, Jalen still sat in silence. His suitcase now zipped again, but scarred from repeated inspections. He watched the slow dance of movement beyond the glass. Uniforms walking faster, eyes sharper, voices lower. Something was changing. He could feel it, even if no one said anything yet. The door creaked open. Lynn entered, crouching slightly to meet his eye level. Jalen, she said gently, can I ask you something? He nodded cautiously. When you picked up your bag, do you remember if there was another one next to it? Same color. Maybe, he said. It all looked the same. But mine had a blue tag with my name. My mom made me put it on. Was the tag still there when you picked it up? Jalen hesitated. I thought so. I didn't really check. Do you still have a matching tag stub? His eyes widened. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the torn half of a blue sticker, handwritten name in his mom's neat lettering. Lynn smiled softly, accepting the piece like it was evidence in a high-profile case. Thank you. That helps a lot. In the control room, Sean now stood over the containment team. Has the suspicious bag been scanned? Just initial sweep, metallic signature inside. Could be tools or components. Nothing declared. Open and under shield protocol. I want full inventory. Sir, the label override it. That label's fake. It's a Trojan, and we missed it. The text moved quickly. Within minutes, the bag was cut open inside the remote access chamber. Inside, multiple electronic parts, irregular wiring, a hollowed-out casing resembling a modified radio, and 3 sealed pouches marked only with alphanumeric stamps. The bomb squad officer on comm frowned. This is either a smuggling mod or a dry run for something worse. Either way, it's deliberate. Shaw didn't look surprised. And we almost let aboard a plane to Canada. Outside the chamber, Hero stood again, tail stiff, eyes locked on the now open suitcase. The air around him seemed to hold its breath. Lynn returned to her desk and synced the tag footage with the recovered surveillance file. She marked the gray-suited man as a red profile, suspected tag swap, unauthorized baggage handler, security breach level 2. And still, the airport PA played softly above their heads, announcing flights, gate changes, and departures, as if none of it had happened, as if the system wasn't moments away from writing the entire morning off as a technical error, as if Jalen's fear hadn't mattered, and the dog's alert hadn't just saved hundreds from a threat no one wanted to admit had nearly passed through unnoticed. As the buzz around the terminal intensified and more senior officials were summoned to assess the breach, Hero stood alert but still, positioned near the deconstructed bag that had sparked the chaos. Shaw's commands became more curt, more precise, the room moving like a tightened gear system finally aware of its friction. But even amidst that burst of urgency, Officer Lynn Alvarez couldn't shake the weight of the scar she had seen under Hero's right ear, nor the way the dog had looked at that bag. Intense, unwavering, not just trained but certain. That certainty stirred something deeper in her memory, a name she had read once during her orientation weeks ago in a post-incident case study that had been scrubbed from the internal server soon after. Case 417B, Canine False Clearance Dispute, Newer Terminal, September 2021. Lynn pulled her tablet and accessed her offline notes, scrolling quickly past entries on protocol until she found the line she half thought she'd imagined. K9 Hero, pulled from active duty following procedural override and public inquiry. She tapped the file open. Hero had once been the center of another storm, one not dissimilar in form, but opposite in blame. That incident had involved a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Bell, a local high school student traveling with his debate team, stopped at security when his bag tested positive for ammonium residue. No one questioned the scan. No one waited for confirmation. Hero, then on routine patrol, had been walked by the bag. No reaction. Nothing. Protocol should have followed with secondary checks, but the flag from the chemical scanner was prioritized. Marcus was separated from his team, detained, questioned without a guardian. Hours later, no actual contraband was found. The trace turned out to be fertilizer residue from a family member's gardening gloves packed accidentally in the front pouch. But by then, Marcus's name had already been whispered through a dozen radios. Local news had aired blurred footage of a juvenile detained for suspicion of materials, and the fallout became national. TSA's response? Blame was quietly laid on Hero. The internal file had stated the dog failed to respond to detectable residue, and Hero was removed from rotation. But Lynn remembered the archived statement from the dog's original handler, Sergeant Eli Griggs, a 20-year K9 veteran who had trained over a dozen service dogs and held one of the highest detection accuracy rates in the region. He had resigned not long after. His exit report, rare in its bluntness, had read, Hero didn't fail. Data did. The dog reacted to what he smelled. What failed was the decision to override instinct for faulty tech. The system protects optics, but optics don't find the truth. The final note from Griggs had been redacted in official channels, but preserved in a training PDF Lynn had kept offline out of instinct. When they don't like what the dog says, they rewrite the story. But the nose doesn't lie. The handlers do. She stared at those lines now, feeling something tighten inside her. Hero had been silenced once for not reacting. And now, when he had reacted, urgently, unmistakably, there were again those ready to second-guess him. Across the room, Shaw issued orders to reroute all remaining international transfer bags for full scan. Harmon, pale with frustration, muttered to no one in particular, "This is how we start chasing ghosts instead of threats. You give a dog too much power, and you lose the human judgment that keeps this system rational." Lynn approached, tone calm but pointed. "You mean the human judgment that ignored a surveillance glitch, dismissed a switch tag, and was ready to treat a kid like a suspect just because the scanner pinged on a jacket zipper?" Harmon shot her a look. We were following procedure. No, Lin said, holding his gaze. You were following assumptions. Meanwhile, at the far end of the checkpoint, Hero's current handler knelt beside the dog and rubbed behind his ear. You still got it, boy, he whispered, not for the crowd, not for validation, but as a quiet tribute. This handler was new to Hero, but the bond had built fast because Hero didn't work like a tool. He worked like a witness. The handler had read the old reports too, heard whispers in training, knew that when Griggs had left, he'd offered to adopt Hero privately, but been denied. Hero had stayed in government custody, property of the department, until clearance allowed him back on limited rotations with new oversight. That scar on Hero's ear? A bite mark from another dog during retraining, when Hero refused to follow a new command that contradicted his detection. It wasn't just instinct. It was memory. Some dogs forget. Hero did not. And Jalen, still sitting in the glass-walled room, had no idea that the dog outside had once been blamed for something just like what was happening now. He only knew that when the barking started, it hadn't been aimed at him. That moment was still vivid in his head. How Hero walked past his bag, how the officers didn't blink, how they kept pulling apart his things like guilt was sewn between his socks. He'd watched adults around him make decisions without looking at what the dog had said. He'd felt what it meant to be doubted on sight. And now, as he pressed his palms flat against his knees and watched more officers gather around the suitcase Hero had actually barked at, he began to understand. Not everyone wanted the truth to come from the obvious place. Because if Hero had been right, then too many people had been wrong. Lin now stood near the exit door, watching Hero with something close to reverence. She clicked her comms. Shaw, I want to request a temporary pull of incident logs from Newark, 2021. Internal K9 case. There's a pattern here we need to document. Shaw glanced over. That file's sealed. Then unseal it, Lin said. Or at least look at it again. It's not the first time Hero pointed us in the right direction while we were busy staring in the wrong one. Shaw didn't respond immediately, but his silence wasn't resistance. It was thought. And outside the security checkpoint, beyond the reach of cameras and code scanners, someone in a gray suit was moving toward a rental car counter, unaware that his clean exit was unraveling one bark, one glance, one unforgotten history at a time. In the wake of the containment breach, Agent Shaw had authorized a full cross-check of all contractor IDs logged into JFK's system between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. The suspect, the man in the gray suit, had triggered no alerts at the passenger checkpoint, which suggested one of two things. Either he had slipped through under a stolen identity, or worse, he hadn't needed to be screened at all. Lynn Alvarez, already several steps ahead, had begun pulling swipe record from restricted employee access panels near Carousel 4B. The digital footprint wasn't deep, but it was sharp. One ID, listed under Robert Kelton, had used a side entrance normally reserved for baggage support staff. The profile marked him as a temporary contractor cleared under a third-party logistics firm working the international terminal. That name, cross-checked with archived TSA incident reports, returned a flag. An unresolved internal inquiry at Miami International Airport last year. Accusations of tampering with luggage. Suspected participation in smuggling electronics across customs without manifest declaration. No formal charges have been filed. The subcontractor let him go quietly. No follow-up. Lynn brought this information straight to Shaw, who read it slowly, jaw locking tighter with each line. So we gave him access, he muttered. We gave him a badge. He used that access to plant the bag and misdirect suspicion, Lynn added. And he chose Jalen's suitcase to swap tags with. It looked similar, unassuming, but I don't think it was random. Shaw gave her a sharp look. You think he picked Jalen on purpose? He didn't need to know the kid. He just needed someone security would doubt before they even started looking. Someone traveling alone. Young. Black. Nervous just by being watched. Shaw didn't deny it. The weight of what they had overlooked pressed in like fog, thick and undeniable. In another room, Baird had been quietly assembling pieces of his own. He'd begun reviewing security footage from alternate angles, employees-only corridors, transfer zones, maintenance paths. He'd found a 3-second clip from the concourse utility cam showing the man in the gray suit, Kelton, passing off a badge to a second individual, who then exited through the side elevator typically reserved for delivery staff. That individual's face wasn't visible, but his build matched a profile from another flagged smuggling operation 6 months ago. What was happening now wasn't a one-off. It was part of something layered and practiced. And Jalen? He'd been a tool, a cover, nothing more than a shape in the crowd that would draw enough suspicion to slow down any real attention from being paid to the real bag, the real threat. Inside the interview room, no one had yet told Jalen the truth. He still sat with his back straight, hands in his lap, watching officers go by through the reinforced glass. His suitcase, now zipped up but warped from repeated inspections, rested at his feet like a worn-out witness. Lynn entered first, this time without a clipboard or pretense. She crouched slightly again, met his eyes. "Jalen," she said, voice lower, "I want to tell you something. We made a mistake. The bag we thought was dangerous wasn't yours. You didn't do anything wrong." Jalen blinked. Slowly. No reaction at first. Only that quiet processing that came when someone had spent hours being treated like the opposite of innocent. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tight. "Yes," Lynn nodded. "We found the man who switched your tag. He's being searched for right now. We're correcting the report. We're sorry." Jalen didn't say anything. His shoulders sagged slightly. Not in relief, but in a kind of sad resignation. He hadn't needed proof to know it wasn't his fault. What hurt more was that no one had listened to him until the evidence forced them to. Elsewhere in the operations center, Shaw convened with airport security leads and federal agents, now pulled in after the breach flag was officially escalated. The suspect, Shaw began, tapping a still image of Kelton from the auxiliary footage, used legitimate clearance to enter baggage zones, selected a soft target for redirection, and planted a suitcase marked with forged transfer credentials. The suitcase contained irregular electronics and components consistent with past smuggling attempts tied to Southeast circuits. "What's the motive?" one agent asked. "Unclear. Could be testing routes, could be a dry run, could be part of a larger device strategy." "And the child?" "Collateral," Shaw said bitterly, "used to shield the real payload by triggering a predictable response from security." Hero's handler, standing at the back of the room, finally spoke up. "It worked. He knew someone like Jalen would slow you down, that you'd focus on the kid and ignore the bag." The silence that followed was uncomfortable but unflinching. "What's our next move?" someone asked. Shaw looked toward the screen again. "We track Kelton. We trace every badge access point he used. And we issue a public report correcting the accusation made against Jalen Monroe. His name gets cleared permanently. And the dog," another officer added. Hero called it right. Shaw didn't answer immediately. He looked at the screen where Hero's profile blinked slowly. Unit ID K9-46A, assignment reevaluation pending. Then he turned away. The dog stays. Back in the observation area, Lynn escorted Jalen out of the room. The hallway felt longer now, less like a tunnel and more like a road still being paved. Jalen carried his suitcase by the handle, its zipper half broken, the tag now restored and reattached by Lynn herself. As they passed Hero, the dog looked up briefly, tail still, head tilted. Jalen met his gaze for a moment, a flicker of something passing between them. Not thanks, not awe, but recognition. They had both been dismissed once, both doubted, and both had spoken in their own way. This time, someone had listened, and someone had finally said, "We were wrong." And somewhere outside the gates, past the check-ins and escalators, Kelton's name had just been added to a list, no longer invisible, no longer untraceable. The story had shifted, but only because someone had stayed long enough to follow the thread. By the time the official incident report had been initiated and routed through TSA's internal documentation system, the entire situation was already being handled with layers of caution. Jalen had been quietly cleared and released to his mother, who flew in that evening after hours of phone calls and tears, her expression equal parts furious and relieved. Shaw personally handed over a printed apology, though it landed on her palm like something too little, too late. But while Jalen was safely on his way home, the real story, the manipulated tag, the planted suitcase, and the role Hero played in uncovering it was beginning to take another, darker turn. The morning after the event, Lynn Alvarez logged into the secured internal drive to upload her footage as part of the official inquiry file. But the moment she attempted to attach the clip, she was met with a stark system message. Error 403. Video source unavailable. Frowning, she navigated back to the folder where she had previously saved the low-resolution cache from the auxiliary feed. The folder existed. The file name showed up. But when she clicked on it, the video had vanished. Not corrupted, not mislabeled, deleted. She checked the system logs. Standard protocol gave a metadata trail for all security media handling. But this time the log was scrubbed. There were no timestamps of deletion, no user login ID, as if the file had never been there. Her stomach sank. Lynn wasn't new enough to be surprised, but she was still young enough to be angry. Someone in the security network had removed the most critical footage of the case. Someone with credentials high enough to bypass file audit flags. She immediately notified Shaw, who arrived at her station within minutes. His jaw locked in a quiet fury he didn't bother masking. "Who else had access to your drive?" he asked. "Only senior-level ops," Lynn said, "and the file wasn't shared. I kept it off Cloud Sync, but the system cache purged. That's not normal." "Exactly. It was intentional." "Yes." Shaw nodded, already turning toward the internal comms. "Put the office in lockdown. Full activity log, pull. Nobody leaves until we check who accessed the backup index." "There is no backup," Lynn said quickly. The network sync hadn't finished yet. They erased it before the data mirrored. Shaw stopped. "Then it's gone." "Not entirely." She opened a side drawer and pulled out her personal diagnostic scanner, the same handheld she used for shift reports and timestamp validation. "I pulled a temporary export onto this. Not the full resolution feed, but enough." She connected the device to her workstation, isolating the auxiliary partition where the scan had been stored. It took only a few seconds before the thumbnail reappeared. The gray-suited man swapping the tag, his hand mid-motion, the unmistakable sequence frozen in one digital breath. "This isn't in the network," she said. "It was only for personal use. Training documentation. But it's time-stamped and traceable." Shaw leaned in. "Is it admissible?" "That depends on who wants it to be. And who wants it buried." Downstairs, Harmon stood near the operations desk, watching airport business resume as if the previous day hadn't happened. Flights arrived. Passengers wheeled suitcases. Announcements echoed from the intercom. But his eyes stayed fixed on the internal screens, fingers drumming the side of the counter. His name hadn't appeared on any tampering logs, but that didn't mean he was clean. He'd been one of the first to insist on pursuing Jalen's inspection over the dog's alert. One of the loudest voices denying Hero's accuracy, and one of the few with long-standing access to system permissions. Lynn didn't accuse anyone directly. Not yet. But she printed a snapshot of the video metadata from her scanner anyway, redacted her own name, and sent it via secured courier to TSA Office of Internal Affairs. Not as a whistleblower. Not yet. But as a placeholder, a record that the truth had once existed. Meanwhile, Hero remained under evaluation status, though Shaw had made it clear the dog wouldn't be removed from duty again without an official inquiry. Hero's behavior log showed full consistency with his past alert pattern. His reaction to the contraband suitcase matched the protocol for a live threat, and his non-reaction to Jalen's bag was now understood to be correct. Still, Shaw had seen this happen before. The closer you got to institutional error, the more likely it was that someone would try to rewrite the narrative. Lynn knew it too. She stayed late that night, watching the scanner slowly render a higher resolution still from her offline backup. It wasn't perfect, but it showed the man's hand pulling the sticker from Jalen's original bag, and his jacket sleeve, navy blue with an insignia badge barely visible. She enhanced the frame again. It was an employee uniform. Not just any employee. Baggage routing crew. Direct subcontractor access. She ran the image through facial recognition, tying the man to the alias Robert Kelton. But what stood out now wasn't just the face. It was the fact that his ID access had been disabled just hours before Lynn had tried to upload the footage. Someone in the system had protected him. Someone with enough authority to erase reroute, and override. Shaw joined her again at midnight. They sat in silence as the image flickered on the screen. "We know who did it," he said. "We have the face, the badge, the bag. But it won't matter if the file disappears again." "Then we print it," Lynn said. "Put on record. Spread it off network. We treat it like old-school evidence. They'll call it inadmissible. Then we'll make sure the people it matters to still see it." Shaw nodded slowly. "You think someone inside helped him?" "I think someone inside knew not to look too hard." And upstairs, the public statement being drafted at TSA headquarters mentioned nothing of Jalen's false accusation. It focused instead on proactive security response and protocol adjustments under review. It praised the K-9 unit without naming the dog. It acknowledged a baggage anomaly without naming the smuggler. But in the drawer beside Lynn's station, the scanner beeped once, file saved, timestamp locked, backup restored in an encrypted folder she'd mirror to an external device before morning. The footage would not vanish again without a fight. The silence they had relied on was breaking. Quietly, deliberately, with every click of a save file and every still frame printed with care. The file from Lynn's backup scanner had made its way through the slow, deliberate channels of unofficial truth, quietly forwarded to trusted personnel, mirrored on external drives, reviewed in private offices with locked doors. Within 24 hours, one frame in particular from the clip had become the fulcrum of an internal reckoning. A clear, unbroken timestamp showing Jalen approaching the carousel with his boarding pass in hand, his eyes scanning the belt, his hand reaching toward a bag, his bag, next to another one of identical make. But it was the adjacent footage, earlier by 3 minutes, that silenced all lingering doubt. The man in the Navy uniform with the contractor badge, Kelton, not only peeling off the original luggage tag from Jalen's suitcase, but also placing a forged one in its place and subtly shifting positions between the two bags, then exiting through a staff-only corridor without even touching the bag he would later frame. Jalen never touched the other suitcase. Not once. The footage showed it with unmistakable clarity. What it also showed, more crucially, was Hero's approach, body tense, nose close to the floor, bypassing Jalen's suitcase with no hesitation, then stopping cold at the second bag, issuing a bark so forceful the handler had to physically hold him back. That video, timestamped, GPS anchored, and now pulled directly from Lynn's scanner to 3 redundant archives, didn't just exonerate Jalen. It validated Hero. The cascade of consequence began quickly. Shaw called for a full internal audit of the K-9 Division's deployment history, including the Newark incident in 2021. Once buried under layers of vague, procedural misalignment, that case now read differently when placed beside this new footage. Griggs, Hero's former handler, had been contacted quietly through unofficial channels. He arrived that evening, civilian now, graying at the temples but eyes still sharp. He watched the footage in silence, then gave a short nod, more to the dog than to the screen. "He never failed," Griggs said, voice flat. "You just stopped listening to him." But the real fracture came when the deeper investigation, spurred by Lynn's persistence and Shaw's reluctant cooperation, uncovered something far more insidious than a simple smuggling operation. The man known as Kelton wasn't acting alone. His clearance, which had allowed him to bypass key security nodes without raising alarms, had been granted through an override code embedded in the AI Trial Division's sandbox environment. That code had been issued not through regular security review, but through a discretionary system meant for simulation testing. The project director of the AI Integrated Threat Detection Pilot, Jacob Rice, had been quietly pushing a proposal to eliminate legacy K-9 units in favor of a proprietary AI-powered detection model. The pitch had stalled months ago due to Hero's record. His detection accuracy was among the highest in the Eastern Corridor, and public trust in K-9 units remained strong. But Rice, who had a vested interest in the rollout of the AI system his division had spent 2 years developing, had needed something public and incident to shift the tide. The Newark case hadn't been enough. Too ambiguous. Too far removed. But if Hero failed a second time, if he missed a real threat, or worse, misled a unit into ignoring one, Rice could claim K-9 was outdated, unpredictable, and inferior to automated solutions. Kelton had once worked with Rice during a contract rotation in Miami. Their connection wasn't documented, but uncovered in metadata trails from internal emails Rice thought had been deleted. Kelton had been leveraged, incentivized, and ultimately protected. He planted the decoy bag. He misdirected attention to Jalen. The suitcase marked for transfer, containing electronics modified to mimic a potential threat, wasn't intended to detonate. It was built to be found, or not found, depending on whether Hero alerted to it or not. It was a test, not of the system but of the dog. When confronted, Rice denied everything. But the audit logs showed code access to the surveillance wipe. The deletion of Lynn's footage had come from his terminal. The override that bypassed bag screening had come from his sandbox. The contractor clearance had been manually approved by his assistant 3 days before the incident. And when Kelton was finally located and arrested trying to cross into Canada through a regional train line, he folded quickly. He wasn't built for loyalty. He gave up the entire plan in a recorded deposition. "I didn't even think the dog would notice," he muttered. "They said if it barked, they'd spin it like a glitch. If it didn't, it'd be proof the dogs weren't reliable anymore." The fall from there was swift. Rice was suspended, then terminated. Legal review began into federal-level charges. Shaw issued a formal retraction of all records naming Jalen Monroe in connection with the incident. A public apology, signed by the Director of Homeland Security, was hand-delivered to Jalen's mother. And this time, it came with more than just words. It came with an offer of support, travel reimbursements, therapy coverage, and an open invitation for Jalen to visit any airport operations center in the country, anytime he wanted, to see what safety should look like. Griggs was offered reinstatement. He declined. "I'm done with uniforms," he said. "But if Hero needs a home when this is all over, he knows where to find me." And Hero stayed. He was walked through the concourse 2 mornings later, not as a suspect, not as a silent witness, but as the one who'd gotten it right. No medals, no ceremony. But every officer who passed him paused. Some nodded, some lowered their eyes, some simply stepped aside in quiet deference. Because the dog who barked had never been wrong. They had just been too busy, too proud, or too political to listen. Lynn, watching from the upper deck, sent the final report to secure storage. Canine detection confirmed accurate. Subject Jalen Monroe cleared of all suspicion. Malicious manipulation of incident protocol identified. Rice, Jacob, terminated. Investigation closed. And then she shut off her terminal. Let the stillness settle. Watched Hero curl into a corner near his handler's boots. Eyes half closed, but ears still twitching. The system hadn't wanted him, but the truth had. The press conference was held in a quiet annex of JFK's administrative wing, away from the bustle of departure boards and luggage belts, but just close enough for the low rumble of flights to remind everyone where it had all begun. A modest podium, 3 flags behind it, a small semicircle of cameras and microphones trained on a single boy in a clean, pressed blue button-up, flanked by his mother and a senior TSA representative. Jalen stood quietly, not smiling, not posturing, just present. His mother held his hand, her other arm resting protectively around his shoulders. The TSA official cleared his throat, then read from the statement with a measured tone that didn't try to oversell. On behalf of the Transportation Security Administration, we acknowledge and take full responsibility for the events that occurred on June 2nd at John F. Kennedy International Airport. A young passenger, Jalen Monroe, was subjected to undue scrutiny and procedural mishandling due to assumptions made in haste and contrary to the signals provided by our own detection personnel. Those responsible have been removed from their positions. Mr. Monroe has been fully cleared of all suspicion, and we deeply regret the distress caused to him and his family. He paused, looked directly at Jalen. "Jalen, we are sorry, and we thank you for your patience and your bravery." Jalen nodded once. The cameras clicked, but the room didn't cheer. It stayed quiet. The gravity hung in the air. A moment of truth, not celebration. Outside, the news moved quickly. National outlets ran headlines within hours. Teen wrongfully detained at JFK. Exposes flaws in airport security bias. Canine dog vindicated after AI sabotage plot. one bark, one boy, and a truth that refused to stay buried. But it wasn't just the headlines that changed the tone. It was the way the story was framed. Jalen wasn't reduced to a mistaken suspect or a child in distress. He became a symbol of what could go wrong when systems stopped listening, and of how quiet courage could crack open assumptions. In interviews, he never once dramatized the experience. When asked how it felt to be accused, he simply said, "I knew I didn't do anything. I just wanted them to believe me." And when asked what he thought of Hero, his answer was immediate. He knew. He was the only one who acted like I was telling the truth. The video of him saying that, just those 2 sentences, went viral in less than a day. Not because it was flashy, because it was undeniable. Hero's name returned to internal records as fully reinstated, no restriction. His record was corrected, the Newark file updated to remove any implication of failure. The Canine Division released a statement confirming Hero's performance had been exemplary in both cases where he had been doubted. But something had shifted, not just in policy but in tone. Shaw, now facing a restructured division and a Department of Justice inquiry into surveillance integrity, proposed a new assignment for Hero, one that recognized both his skill and the human cost of institutional misjudgment. And so, Hero was reassigned, not to baggage scans or patrols, but to a unit newly formed under the Department of Child Welfare and Passenger Rights. His new title, K-9 Liaison, Youth Protection Initiative. His role? To assist TSA child advocates in escorting minors traveling alone, calming children during emergency reroutes or detainments, and providing a grounding presence during high-stress events. Not a mascot, not a token, a partner, real work, real impact. The first time Hero stepped into his new terminal space, a calmer corridor with lower lighting, walls painted in soft earth tones, seating built for small travelers, he didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He lay beside the entryway, alert but relaxed, as a young girl with a red backpack sat beside him, clutching a stuffed penguin. She didn't say much, just reached out to pet behind his ear. He leaned in gently. That moment, quiet as it was, echoed all the way back to the day he barked in the security zone and no one listened. This time, someone had. Lynn Alvarez remained with TSA, but her role expanded. She was formally appointed to a task force focused on reforming data integrity protocols and reinstating human oversight alongside automated systems. Her name appeared in several white papers over the following months, including one titled The Nose Knows, Integrating AI with Biological Detection Without Bias. She didn't go on television. She didn't ask for recognition. But she visited Hero every week, bringing him the same brand of dental chews his original handler used to give him, keeping his routine stable as the world finally began to understand what he had never stopped doing right. As for Jalen, he returned to school that fall with less fear, but more clarity. He worked quietly on a science project about non-visual communication in animals, using Hero as his primary case study. He called it What You Don't See Can Still Be Right. It won second place at the regional fair. The first place winner had a robot that could sort recyclables. Jalen didn't mind. His project wasn't about winning. It was about telling a story only he could tell. At the fair, one of the judges asked what he wanted to do when he grew up. He shrugged, grinned slightly. Maybe something where I get to build things people actually trust. The judge smiled. Like what? Jalen's eyes sparkled. Systems. But the kind that listen better. Time moved forward. Flights continued. Announcements echoed. Suitcases rolled. But somewhere between Gate 12 and the Children's Assistance Center, a boy once accused and a dog once silenced had redrawn the lines of what justice could look like. Not loud, not perfect, but honest. They had reminded everyone watching that the truth doesn't always need a shout. Sometimes it just needs anyone to stop long enough and hear the bark for what it really means. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing so we can keep sharing stories that matter. Which moment hit you the hardest? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone.